in that initial slide that I had, where it's the first thing, is that if we have a lack of digestive enzymes, you get these poorly digested proteins. That starts the inflammatory cascade right there. That's
So
critical.
is that something you add to your program? For
If I do a GI analysis and identify poor digestion, absolutely. I don't shotgun it in, but if there are symptoms, there's a whole list of, and we all have these lists of symptoms related to hypochlorhydria or pancreatic deficiencies, and if they have some of those symptoms, there's nothing wrong with recommending digestive enzymes with that. You bet. You bet. But you can't tell patients it's okay to go out and eat the food that they're sensitive to as long as they take the enzymes. You can't do that. Yeah.
And what about the colostrum issue? Since that's one of the gut healers, and the PRP,
Right.
I'd say the spray for inflammation and
Right.
all that. Is there an issue with colostrum in cross-reactive foods, number one? And number two, if you take it long enough, does the colostrum or the PRP spray reprogram the immune system enough to where you can get rid of some of these
Yes.
issues?
Yes and yes. Yes, it's an issue. If you have a dairy sensitivity, you really can't take the colostrum. Most people can't take the colostrum if they have a dairy sensitivity, but there is no casein in the PRPs, none whatsoever,
And you spray.
in the spray, right? So the spray is safe, and the spray, the job of PRPs is to reset the immune system. Let me continue if I may, and I've got about 5 more minutes, and then I'll stay all night for questions. Oh. So, what have we talked about? What are the 4 things? Any of these guys, no knee pads? The number 1 cause of morbidity and mortality in the industrialized world is an immune-mediated inflammatory cascade. Autoimmune disorders occur 10 times more common in celiac disease than in the general population. What are the 4 things? 4 things that I'm hoping you'll walk out with tonight. Where do the systemic complications come from with autoimmune syndromes? And where can we make an impact? Our impact is right there. Increase intestinal permeability. And of course, if we identify pancreatic insufficiencies or hypochlorhydria, addressing those, of course. Increased intestinal permeability is an early biological change that often precedes the onset of autoimmune disease. The autoimmune process can be arrested if the interplay between genes and environmental triggers is prevented by reestablishing intestinal barrier function. That's number 1. There's a test for intestinal permeability that is extremely sensitive, and it's coming back positive maybe 5 out of 10 times for the patients that it's recommended to. That at least one of these markers will come back positive. We've got 7 different antibodies that are looked at here. Number 2, 50% of these patients do not respond to alpha-gliadin peptide, but to a diverse set of gliadin and gluten peptides. Like this. All of these patients here, these top half of the patients in this study, none of them responded to 33-mer. They responded to something else. Here's a 10-peptide panel that just came out in January of this year. Practitioners are no longer getting false negatives. Cross-reactivity. This is number 3. Cross-reactivity occurs when the shape of one antigen is similar to another antigen, and it triggers the immune response of the primary antigen, in this drawing gliadin. Here's the panel for cross-reactive. Now, this is not complete, so you know. There can be cross-reactivity to bacteria causing celiac disease, cross-reactivity to viruses causing celiac disease, but these are so common. You're going to have much better success if you identify these in patients and get them out of there. Stop throwing gasoline on the fire. Curcumin. There's that slide. I thought it was here. This is a slide for curcumin and all the different diseases. Remember that study I said had 340 references in the back of it? In the International Journal of Biochemistry and Cell Biology? 340 references for this. And look at all the ones that are autoimmune. Gluten sensitivity packs have glutamine, anti-inflammatives, curcumin, and a number of other anti-inflammatories, all designed around epigenetics to quiet down the genes of inflammation and encourage the genes of anti-inflammation. This is the basic protocol I'd recommend you consider that you start with in your patients to heal their gut. There are many other things that you may find useful in your practice. This is not complete in any way whatsoever. There are many beneficial things out there. These are just the ones that have many, many studies to validate them. And the gluten sensitivity kit. I recommend the kit for at least 1 month, possibly 2, depending on the severity of the patient's problems. And then they stay with the packs for a year. And if they weren't breastfed at birth, they stay with the probiotics. Also, for patients when I'm trying to repopulate the ecology of the gut, I have them eat fermented vegetables at least twice a week. I prefer 4 times a week, but at least twice a week. Kimchi, sauerkraut. Make your own fermented vegetables. Pickles. I Googled, someone asked me last week, and I didn't know the answer, someone in the audience Googled it immediately. For pickles, you can make vinegar-free pickles that are fermented, and they're very beneficial for the gut. And if you want more extensive information, the DVDs are available. They're at thedoctor.com. And with that, I formally say thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you. Now I can take as many questions as you like. Looks like we've got about 10 minutes. Yes, please.
If you have someone that's been off gluten for a very long time, do these tests still work?
No. Well, yes. No.
Yes or no?
Yes, no. That's actually the answer. People, docs have said, well, I need to challenge them because they haven't had any gluten in a long time. No, don't challenge them. You do array number 3, the gluten peptide, first to see if what they've been doing is working. And for the vast majority of your patients, they've been gluten-free, but it's not working. They're still going to have positive peptides to gluten. And that, once they see that, you've got them. Then they say, but I've been gluten-free. There's something else triggering this. And it's not cross-contamination when these people are trying so hard. It may be, but it's not likely. We blamed everything on cross-contamination about 5 years ago. And that's a valid concern, but it's not complete. In terms of doing gluten challenges, there's a website, glutensyndrome.net. And that is a patient of mine, actually, whose daughter was 22, a senior in nursing school, and her GI demanded that she do a gluten challenge for 3 weeks. And she went into a severe major depression, was hospitalized, and she was out of school for over a year. Over a year on heavy medications to try and come back. So I don't ever encourage gluten challenges. Yes?
I'm confused, because my wife says I do often. You said dairy-free, gluten-free, right?
Right.
But I misunderstood maybe. Your add cholesterol, that's dairy.
Right.
So how do you do the dairy-free and add cholesterol?
Well, if they don't have the antibodies in array number 4 to dairy, then I'll recommend them with the colostrum. If they do have antibodies number 4, then I'll make a clinical judgment call. Is it more important to heal this gut for a month or 2? And if they don't have any outright symptoms from taking the colostrum, especially this pure colostrum, I'll give it to them for a month or 2. They've been eating dairy for years. So if I get the rest of the dairy out of their diet, and I give them this colostrum, I'm assuming it'll be a little bit less of an insult than having cheese and milk and yogurt all the time. But the benefits of this for a month or 2 may outweigh the potential detriment to it. It's a clinical judgment call. If they're very severe or their permeability index is really high, then I definitely will use this. And they get a little mucusy from it, I say, that's okay. We'll deal with the mucus for a month. Let's just heal that gut as quickly as we can.
So they're free of dairy, all dairy, except maybe for that?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so what about raw dairy?
Raw dairy.
I feel like all the studies focus on pasteurized.
It does. You're absolutely right. And that's a very good point. However, the protein structures are still very similar, and you can't fool the immune system. Once you're allergic to, if your child was born and raised and exposed to raw dairy, then that's a whole different ballgame. If they don't have dairy antibodies, great, but but I can't, no one knows for sure, but we know the protein structures are extremely similar. And they've tested for cross-reactivity in the laboratory, raw dairy versus pasteurized, they're the same. Yes?
What about GMOs, the genetically modified gluten wheat products here in the U.S. that can't even get into other countries?
There are no GMOs in the U.S.
In the U.S.?
They don't, it has not been genetically modified, it's been hybridized.
So, okay,
The difference is GMO is changing the DNA structure in the laboratory. Hybridization is out in the field, and they're growing shorter plants that can hold the thicker heads and don't fall over and die, right? So it's altered the protein structure tremendously.
huge amounts of gluten, 90%.
Yeah,
90%.
absolutely. It's called the 50-50 rule. In the last 50 years, 50% more gluten.
So what does that have to do with, I mean, would that play into how you look at it if it was a gluten product from Europe or something like that?
We
It was not
thought so,
hybridized.
you know, you think so, but the incidence of celiac disease is just as high in Europe as it is here. Yeah, so it's, and the incidence of celiac disease is going up exponentially. It's not that the tests are getting better, more people are getting sick, more people with this. They found 9,000 blood samples of Air Force personnel from the late 40s and early 50s. Mostly men, there weren't many women in the Air Force back then. And these are healthy young guys, and their blood was frozen. There was a staph infection on the base, so they're drawing blood, and and Mayo Clinic got this, and the blood was preserved for 60 years. It's a fluke that it was preserved. There was a leak in the freon of the unit, and so the rubber stoppers on the blood got really frozen, and so the blood was saved. Usually those stoppers in the 1950s only lasted for 2 years. Yeah. Trivia, but it's kind of interesting. And so they identified, they looked at the blood to see who had antibodies. How many of these were silent celiacs, didn't know that they had celiac disease. And then what happened to them over the next 50 years? How many died? And then they looked at young men of the same age, healthy men. They came in Humboldt County, which is where Mayo is, who come in for physicals for one reason or another, and they looked at their blood. How many of them have antibodies for silent celiac disease? And they compared them. And today, there's a 4-fold increase in silent celiacs compared to 60 years ago. And these guys, 60 years ago, their mortality rate compared to the numbers of what these guys have today, it's a 4-fold higher mortality index. They're dying quicker, more people are getting it, and they're dying quicker now than ever before. Why is that? It's why gluten sensitivity is so prevalent. It's because our toxic world is chewing up our gut. And you chew up the gut, you get permeability, and here comes the autoimmune mechanisms. That's the reason why. It's the gut. You gotta heal the gut. And if you can get your patients to take 1 pack a day for a year and get them to stop throwing gasoline on the fire, you've got a really good chance of enhancing the quality of their lives and reducing the risk of this increased mortality.
What is the minimum versus the optimal amount of time for breastfeeding to acquire the antibodies?
To acquire.
Well, the antibodies necessary for the immune system to function properly.
Well, it's good question. I've only read one paper on that. It was 3 weeks as a minimum.
Really?
That kids who were breastfed for the first 3 weeks of life, their vitality and their IQs, their functional capabilities at 8 years old was much higher than kids that weren't breastfed.
But they do say that they gain benefit a year out.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, there's much, but he said the minimum. What's the minimum?
And then the optimum would be,
I'm sorry?
the optimum would be.
The optimum? I don't really know. My impressions are, when the kid's got teeth, he should be eating. That's my impression, but I don't really know. And I've not seen a study that could convincingly, show that it's better to do 2 years instead of 1 year or 4 years instead of 2. That's not my field. But my thought is, we get teeth, it's to chew food.
I have a question about the FDA definition of gluten-free, which I guess is like under 20 parts per million. And so things like soy sauce come up as maybe 7 parts per million, so they can actually be called gluten-free. What's
Good
your
question.
take on that?
In Canada, it's 5 parts per million. And that's, the only reason is Canada uses more sophisticated equipment. That the equipment that the FDA approves of in this country can only do 20 parts per million. It can't go lower than that. So they say that's enough. But in Canada, they say, no, people at 10 get sick. It's 5 parts per million.
So
And it's unrealistic to say 0. It's not possible to get 0. But my impressions have been, what I've seen, is that 20 parts per million seems to be okay for most. But no one's been following the antibody trail. I mean, these tests just came out January 11th of this year. So give it 3 years, 5 years down the road, and you'll have tons of information about, they're still producing antibodies and they're eating 5 parts per million. You can't eat 5 parts per million. But no one's been following it, so it's all been academic at this point.
Thank you.
So what's the gold standard then? Is it all 4 of those Cyrex Labs tests?
Good question. I recommend you consider doing arrays 2 and 3. That's intestinal permeability and the gluten peptides. Don't do 4. But then, if 3 comes back positive, then call the lab and say run 4, because they freeze the blood for 90 days.
Okay.
So save your patient a little bit of money and explain to them. There are foods, if you're sensitive to gluten, there are some other foods that your bodies think you're still eating gluten. So let's just wait on that last test until we see if you're having any reactions. If you are, then I'd like to order the other test. Would that be okay? So you get the patient's feedback ahead of time for that.
If you already know your gluten and you've been working it, should you just go do 4?
No, you need to do 3 because you need to identify whether what you're doing is successful or not.
Well, you've seen success,
Well, you symptomatically,
symptomatically success.
but you're not seeing success to the autoimmune mechanisms that may be going on chewing up your cerebellum because no one's ever checked.
Right,
So
so do 3.
do 3. Do 3 to find out and give them a high five. This is working. But my money is, for most people, it won't come back negative.
Second question, how much fish oil would you inflict upon them?
It's safe. All the studies say it's safe up to 3 grams a day for an adult. Some studies go as high as 20 grams a day to drop cholesterol. You can drop cholesterol 100 points in 3 months if you give them 20 grams a day of fish oil. But you have to be really careful about hypocoagulability, right? Blood thinning with fish oils. So for me, I do it by body weight. If they're under 125 pounds, I give them 3 grams a day. If they're between 125 and 50, I give them 4 to 5 grams a day. Over 150, about 5 to 6 grams a day. How much is in there? 1 gram.
So we should supplement them.
If they'll do it.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, if they'll do it. I'd rather they do this package for a month, maybe 2 months, depending on how severe they are. And then, when you say, great, all right, we're done with the colostrum, we're done with the liquid vitamin D, because there's 5,000 in each pack here. Now let's bring the fish oils up a little bit, because your cholesterol's a little high. Let's see if we can just drop it down. So it depends on the patient and how compliant you think they'll be. The critical thing is a year on these. You've got to heal the gut. There's no time to go into all this tonight. I had 2 hours with you guys. But people don't heal on a gluten-free diet. 8 years, 12 years after being on a gluten-free diet, they still have vitamin deficiencies. 12 years on a gluten-free diet. Their homocysteine, the average is still 17 for males and 15 for females, and it's supposed to be below 8. Yeah.
The Cyrex Labs, you've been using it, I guess, for the last year since it's been available. Have you seen it? Are there any key points you could share with us that you've observed now that you're measuring these assays that are either surprising to you or would be important for us to know as clinicians?
Yeah, sure. Do 2 and 3. That's the first thing. Consider 2 and 3 on every patient,
Right?
because you're looking for the mechanism of autoimmunity when you're identifying permeability. And in number 3, if 1 comes back positive, just 1 peptide, that's as severe as 10 of them coming back positive. It's just as bad. You can't say, well, there's only 1, it's not a problem. Yes, it is. For that patient, that may be all the immune response that they can warrant, they can get going, is to that 1. Also, if wheat germ agglutinins come back positive, that's the lectin of wheat. Be cautious about all lectins. And none of these tests will look at other lectins, but just be aware, you might want to get lectins out of their diet for a while.
In terms of your therapy though, I meant, have you seen any dropping in measurements?
This works. This really works. If you get them to stop throwing gasoline on the fire, you do this package for a month, maybe 2 months, and then you do this package with the, continue with the triflora, with the probiotics. It works really well. Patients feel good, and when you recheck them 6 months down the road, the antibodies are down or they're coming down.
Great, and that's, what if they accidentally, because it's very hard to avoid gluten 100% all the time for everybody. So if they have a little bit of gluten once in a while, do you still see it coming down?
I didn't put the study here tonight. They followed 1,600 celiacs and 3,300 of their first degree relatives for 20 years. That's siblings and parents. Every year they got questionnaires, how you doing, how's your health, have you been following the diet, have you seen a doctor, can we see the doctor's reports, every year. And after 20 years, what happened to these celiacs? The standard mortality ratio for celiac disease is 2 to 1. That means across the spectrum, I'm 59, if I had celiac disease, my brother's 58, and he does not have celiac disease, I'm twice as likely to die at any age compared to my brother of something, diabetes, heart disease, something. When I'm 35, I'm twice as likely to die than when he's 35. If I'm 76, I'm twice as likely to die than when he's 76. That's the SMR, it's 2 to 1. So they followed these people for 23 years to see what happened to these people. Those that were following the gluten-free diet as closely as they could, their SMR was 0.5 to 1. They were healthier because they were watching their food intake. They were being selective about what they ate. Those that were not following the diet exclusively, defined as eating gluten once per month, their SMR was 6 to 1. 6 to 1.
Way higher than those who are eating tons of gluten, is what you're saying.
Yeah, no, 6 to 1 it was way higher
Yeah,
than those that were not eating gluten.
but the one, you said it was 2 to 1 for the
Yeah.
standard.
Oh,
So
well,
6 to 1 is
2
way
to
higher.
1 includes everybody. Those that are on the gluten-free diet, those that are not,
Oh,
it includes them all.
okay.
Once a month exposure, and the SMR was 6 to 1. You can't mess around with this, because your memory B cells don't forget. And you activate the immune system producing antibodies, the switch gets turned on. You have gluten today, the switch stays turned on for 4 to 6 weeks. Once you turn it on. It doesn't go down tomorrow because, well, I just won't have any toast tomorrow. And the switch doesn't turn off. It stays on. Ask any immunologist. We forget about this. We forget about memory B cells. We think it's okay to have a little, well, you know, it's just once a month, or a couple of croutons, I'll just pick them off. No, you can't do that. Get a new salad. Send it back.
For the PRP spray, we don't have the data probably yet, but do you think it might reduce that ratio?
Yes, yes I do. It's too soon.
Yeah.
Yes,
The colostrum that you have has the PRPs in it, it's enhanced, you know, it's enriched.
yes, about 3 to 4%.
Yeah, does that mean you don't have to take the spray?
No one knows. No one knows. The spray is so powerful. I've got the slides in my full day. If you see the slides on PRPs and what they're saying at Harvard about PRPs in the Journal of Alzheimer's Research with humans, not with animals, with humans, it's arresting Alzheimer's, mild to moderate Alzheimer's. It's arresting it. It's not reversing it, but it's arresting it using PRPs. This was the Journal of Alzheimer's Research in 2008.
So
Yes.
have you looked at any studies with the gluten enzymes?
The gluten enzymes.
Enzymes sold to break down the gluten.
There are no studies on gluten enzymes. It's all anecdotal. Well, these are enzymes that'll break down gluten, so it's okay to have the enzymes, and it's okay to eat a little gluten if you have the
For
enzymes.
accidental exposures.
My personal belief, anytime you go out to eat, if you're a celiac, you take the enzymes. Just to be safe because of accidental exposure. The chef that's making your rice pasta use the same spoon to stir the other pasta. That's all it takes. That's all it takes. So I think it's a great idea for patients to take these enzymes, but not as an excuse to eat the food once in a while. And there are no studies. It's all anecdotal. on that. Yes?
Are there any studies between gluten sensitivity and or celiac and amnesia?
Amnesia? No one's ever asked me that. I don't know.
You forgot.
But this, I forgot. But this is how you can find out. Go to PubMed, stands for Public Medical Information, pubmed.com. It's National Library of Medicine, and you've got 35 million articles at your fingertips, and it opens up on the search engine. Just type in celiac disease and amnesia, and you'll see it, it's there.
Okay.
You type in celiac disease and thyroid, here come 3,000 articles.
Right.
What's the percentage of family members of celiac? If one person's identified, what are the stats on that other family members?
22%.
Wow. So 22% of the time.
It's the highest risk of developing celiac disease is if you have a first-degree relative, and it's 22%.
Because the way I understand you saying all this, obviously it'd be better if none of us were eating any gluten.
That's right.
That's
Well,
the
no,
bottom
almost,
line.
Almost, the bottom line.
But if
Now,
you're not genetically, if you don't have the genetic piece, I mean, you still feel like we're playing with fire.
the genetic piece is for celiac disease, not for gluten sensitivity.
I guess maybe I should say either.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you think we all have the
I had a really good
genetic-
thought and it just went.
We all have the genetic susceptibility to gluten sensitivity?
No, we all don't. No one's looked at that yet. They've identified 17 different alleles to gluten sensitivity now. There are 2 genes specifically associated with celiac disease. There are 2 genes that have been specifically associated with gluten sensitivity. HLA-DQ1 and 3 are associated with gluten sensitivity. 2 and 8 are gluten sensitivity and celiac disease.
And you test the,
Yeah.
you can test those.
Yeah,
That's
there's 2
separate
labs.
from-
Prometheus, it's a blood test, and Kimball, Kimball, is a cheek swab. And they do their genetic test for celiac disease, not gluten sensitivity. The gluten sensitivity ones are commercially available only with Enterolab. But their test, they use Red Cross to do their genetic tests, and you know, we think with genetic tests, you check the gene's the gene, but that's not the case. The Red Cross protocol is 85% accurate. It misses 15%. I don't know why, but it does.
Who would you recommend between the 2?
Kimball.
Prometheus and Kimball?
Kimball, yeah. They're both as accurate, but Kimball's just a cheek swab. You can do it on a child, you can do it on anybody, it's really easy. Just take a little Q-tip that they send you and just rub the inside and put it in the tube and send it to them.
So if you do the gene test and say it's positive, like, I have a family member, and I'm pretty sure that they're all gluten sensitive based on their health or lack thereof.
Yes.
But nobody believes me. And so somebody suggested I get a gene test, and then that would at least show my parents.
Array number 3 is much more sensitive, the gluten peptides.
But I can't get them to take that test.
Ah,
Is there any way I can get a test, and then it says to everybody else, you probably are?
well,
The
if you,
gene test.
the likelihood, the science to the statement, if I've got it, you've got it, is based most on genes, mostly on genetics, so, right. I would do Kimball's test or Prometheus's test, looking for the genes of celiac. But if it comes back negative,
Doesn't mean it.
you may have gluten sensitivity above the waterline of the iceberg, manifesting in your brain, not in your gut, as celiac. So if you focus on celiac, you should be focusing on the bigger picture, which is gluten sensitivity. Because it could manifest as schizophrenia, or attention deficit, or Hashimoto's, or myopathies, or rheumatoid. Right, all of it, all of it. Just spend 20 minutes on PubMed.com and type in celiac disease and atherosclerosis, celiac disease and polycystic ovaries, celiac disease and rheumatoid, and just go, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. You just keep seeing it.
So,
There's over 20,000 studies on this.
When I eat gluten, I'm dyslexic.
Uh-huh.
And when I'm gluten-free, I can read just fine.
2 more questions.
Yeah, 2 more questions. Sure.
so are you recommending the DQ1, 3, 2, and 8 for both the sensitivity and the celiac
I don't recommend genetic testing.
at all?
Yeah. I recommend array number 3. because that's where we're looking at what's your body doing right now. And it's sensitive and specific, it's over 92% sensitive and specific. It's up there, it's a great test. Yeah. Last question.
What's the drawback to the genetic test?
Say it again.
What's the drawback to the genetic test?
It's second tier. 30 to 40% of the population has the genes for celiac disease. It means in this room, 3 or 4 out of 10 of you have the genes for celiac. It's not that you have the gene, that's your weak link, but the question is what's pulling at the chain. And when the chain gets pulled, then the link starts to break. And array number 3, the gluten peptide test, will show you that. Okay, folks, thank you very much.
Thank you all for your rapt attention. This is our last lecture for the year. We just finished our 5th year. One of the other parts of it is, remember, networking, bring brochures or other information about what's going on in your practice to share with the others. That's what we use the rest of the table out there for. We'll meet again. You'll get the notices for January. If you're not on the email list, make sure I can read it, and you'll get the next notice. So we're looking at January, February, off March, April, May, then July, August. Kind of like stay away from the big events of Austin so we can not interfere with the rest of our life, because we can't just be practitioners. Thank you all. Thanks,
Wonderful to see you, sweetie. Wow.